Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of Toke Signals TV, your source for the latest in cannabis and hemp news. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor of TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, let's look at our Toke TV Bud Pick of the Week. This week, we have a strain called Black Domina. I got this at an access point called Green Comfort Collective in Port Orchard, Washington, for just $10 a gram, and well worth it. Black Domina is an indica strain. It's very good for pain, and it will couch lock you if you smoke very much. $10 a gram, Port Orchard. Let's do the news, shall we? We have a new poll this week from CNN that shows, once again, the majority of Americans want cannabis legalized. This new poll from CNN and Opinion Research shows that 55% of Americans support the legalization of cannabis, while 44% are opposed. This 55% level of support for legalization represents a rise of 12 points from just more than a year ago. Polls from both Pew and Gallup have recently shown similar numbers, with majorities supporting cannabis legalization for the first time in American history. Gallup's poll showed support for legalization at 58% in October. Most Americans don't view marijuana as being physically or mentally harmful, according to the new CNN poll. They are evenly split on whether pot is addictive and whether it leads to other drugs. Just 19% describe marijuana as a major problem in society today. The rise in support for legalization comes as two states, Colorado and Washington, have approved legalization measures. Colorado pot shops began selling weed last week, and Washington's are expected to join them sometime around mid-year. Marijuana remains illegal, of course, under U.S. federal law, but the Obama Justice Department has said it won't go after legal cannabis businesses in either state, as long as they follow state laws and 8 federal guidelines. A disappointment from New York this week, where Governor Cuomo's medical marijuana plan, announced in his State of the State address, falls short. Patients and advocates are disappointed that Governor Cuomo didn't call for comprehensive legislation to effectively help patients in his state get medicine. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, Governor Cuomo needs to push the New York Senate to get a bill to his desk. It seems that Cuomo garnered all the positive headlines before his State of the State address without ever having to actually do anything that will help a single medical marijuana patient. After making national headlines for his support of medical marijuana, then Governor Cuomo, in his State of the State address, only briefly mentioned his medical marijuana plan. Cuomo administration officials said that the program would involve distributing medical marijuana through 20 hospitals statewide, and the Department of Health would be charged with promulgating regulations. Cuomo had initially said he would share details about the plan during his State of the State address, but instead provided only limited comment. The governor's policy briefing book, published during his speech, outlines what amounts to a medical marijuana research program, not the comprehensive system that patients need, and that's according to both the Drug Policy Alliance and the Marijuana Policy Project. Critical questions remain as yet unanswered, such as which patients will be eligible for medical marijuana, or where the marijuana for the program would come from. Administration officials have suggested they had obtained marijuana from the federal government or from supplies seized by law enforcement. But those options, while specifically outlined in the 1980 Olivieri law, upon which the governor based his program, they're both unlikely, and they pose significant safety risks to patients. Additionally, public and private hospitals may be resistant to participating in a state program that instructs them basically to violate federal law. Patients and advocates were disappointed that the governor didn't make a commitment to support the comprehensive legislation that has passed the New York Assembly 4 times and would truly offer patients the medicine they need. As someone living with stage 4 breast cancer, I'm disappointed that I did not hear more from Governor Cuomo detailing his medical marijuana initiative, said Beverly McLean of New York City. My hope is he's hearing the voices of all us patient advocates across state making clear we need a comprehensive solution that provides medical marijuana access for folks like me who are suffering now. I look forward to seeing the governor work with the Senate to pass a Compassionate Care Act as soon as possible, McLean said. I'm disappointed with the governor's announcement today, and more so I am frustrated that he still does not acknowledge the serious, debilitating conditions our children suffer from every day, said Kate Hentz of the Hudson Valley, whose daughter Morgan suffers from a severe seizure disorder. We know that medical marijuana could greatly improve the quality of Morgan's life and so many other New Yorkers. Announcing a pilot program with little to no detail is hardly the answer. It barely even addresses the issue, Hentz said. Every day he waits means another day of seizures for my daughter. Critically and chronically ill New Yorkers need a more comprehensive bill, namely the Compassionate Care Act, to be passed in the Senate during this 2014 legislative session, according to Nancy Rivera, a 4-time cancer survivor from Troy, New York. We must not and should not have to wait for a system to be put in place in our state, and we shouldn't have to settle for a limited program which is over 30 years old. New Yorkers cannot wait any longer for the Compassionate Care Act to be passed, Rivera said. I was pleased Governor Cuomo mentioned his decision to support medical marijuana, but I was much more discontented to hear that he does not acknowledge that times have changed, said James W. Lister, HIV positive since 1976, living with full-blown AIDS since 1996. The 1980 Olivieri legislation cannot in 2014 provide the compassionate care required for the lives of people living with full-blown AIDS, young children suffering from epileptic seizure syndromes, people fighting cancer, and those suffering the pains of MS. I'm glad the governor supports medical marijuana, but I am concerned that this limited program will not help my son Oliver, said Missy Miller of Long Island, whose son suffers from severe seizure disorders. I urge the governor to work with the Senate to pass a comprehensive piece of legislation that will include everybody, she said. Though we are deeply appreciative of the governor's move to support medical cannabis, reviving the 1980 law is unlikely to be sufficient to address the issues patients face in 2014, and thus the legislature still needs to act, said Holly Anderson, director of the Breast Cancer Coalition of Rochester, New York. It is incomprehensible that New Yorkers continue to suffer while residents in neighboring states can gain much needed relief. According to Anderson, her group is going to double its efforts to get the Senate to finally pass the Compassionate Care Act so they can deliver it to the governor for his signature. Dr. Sunil Agarwal, MD, applauded the governor for his support of medical marijuana and for restarting the 1980 program. He called that a fine step. But Dr. Agarwal added that the science has advanced a lot in the last 34 years. It makes sense to move forward with a more comprehensive system consistent with today's scientific evidence, he said. What's good is that Governor Cuomo has joined the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers and Americans who support medical marijuana, said Gabriel Sayegh, State Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. Unfortunately, the governor didn't acknowledge the need for legislative reform, and his proposal is a limited interim step at best. What we need in New York is a comprehensive solution to allow patients with serious and debilitating conditions to access the specific types of marijuana they need under the supervision of their healthcare provider. Patients and their families need the governor to join us in calling on the Senate to finally pass the Compassionate Care Act so we can finally provide patients with the relief New Yorkers need and deserve. We had a bill filed in the Washington legislature this week that would gut Washington State's medical marijuana law. The story's on Toke Signals. Representative Eileen Cody on Monday pre-filed House Bill 2149, and that bill would essentially gut the medical marijuana law. Representative Cody, chair of the House Health Care Committee, in her bill has hewn very closely to the recommendations made by the Washington State Liquor Control Board. The medical marijuana patient community reacted quickly to the bill, and the reaction wasn't a positive one. As some of us had been predicting since early 2012, legalization measure I-502 is being used as cover to eviscerate Washington's medical marijuana law under the guise of bringing the medical marijuana community into compliance with recreational marijuana rules. Safe access for patients is being endangered. House Bill 2149 would establish a mandatory registry for patients and designated providers, deceptively referred to in the bill's language as a recognition card. It would redefine chronic pain. It would change the patient possession limit. It would reduce it from 24 ounces down to 3 ounces, with special endorsement required if up to 8 ounces is needed. All of this would be reported to the Washington Department of Health. Patient plant limits will be reduced from 15 plants of any size and any stage of growth to 3 flowering plants and 3 non-flowering plants. No increase is allowed if a patient is also a designated provider for someone else. HB 2149 eliminates patient collective gardens, effectively shutting down Washington State's dispensary system. It forces the expiration of current authorizations. All valid authorizations expire on May 1st, 2015. It establishes a committee made up of the Liquor Control Board and the Department of Health to determine if cannabis patients need to grow their own after 2019 if recreational storefronts are open. And for some reason, it changes every use of the word cannabis in the medical marijuana law to the word marijuana, for what that's worth. Now, if we do nothing, this bill passes the Washington legislature. You can read the bill for yourself at a link on the Toke Signals story, bill filed in Washington legislature would gut medical marijuana. Once you read the bill, please contact Representative Cody and tell her that the rights of medical cannabis patients should be preserved if she wants our votes. Now, John Novak of the Cannabis Action Coalition is asking that we please be respectful in our correspondence. No matter what you think, their district votes are the ones that put them in office. I always begin my conversations with "to the honorable representative," or Senator, Novak said. It will win us all more points in the end. If you live in Washington's 34th legislative district, please consider voting for Libertarian candidate Chris Kelly to replace Representative Cody. He's running against her in this year's election, and you can visit Chris Kelly's Facebook page for more information on his candidacy. What kind of society would pass new laws that purposely make it more difficult for people with serious medical problems to seek medical help from a doctor? Asked Seattle-based activist Steve Sarich of the Cannabis Action Coalition. What kind of deranged mind would purposely propose regulations that would deny access to life-saving medications or attempt to make that medication so expensive that the average patient could never afford it? Who would even think of concocting a strategy to de-incentivize medical care by making it nearly impossible to get? Sarich asked. We certainly have to question the moral and ethical compass of politicians that would write or vote for legislation that would deny ready access to critical medications to the sick and disabled in our state. Will our state legislature actually pass legislation forcing patients with AIDS, cancer, and multiple sclerosis to register like sex offenders in order to have their medication? Sarich asked. Will they really pass legislation to eliminate the ability to treat certain debilitating conditions like PTSD with medication that has been proven to be effective? Will they really vote to make it significantly more difficult for doctors to provide health care to their patients? Will they really consider letting some patients suffer or die just so that they can increase tax revenues for the state? Sarich asked. The fact that Representative Eileen Cody is a nurse and took the Nightingale Pledge makes this legislation all the more heinous. Any legislator in this state who votes for this bill or any other legislation making it more difficult for patients to get critical health care should be removed from office by the voters, Sarich said. This is an election year, and I think our legislators, both Democrats and Republicans, may want to seriously consider that before simply casting their votes along party lines. This is the kind of legislation that voters will not ignore. Medical cannabis patient Brian Stone asked, maybe wouldn't it be wise to wait until the implementation of I-502 to make any changes to the medical marijuana law? to ascertain the impact of legalization on patients. That would make a lot more sense. The current medical marijuana law is serving qualified patients who most need this medication. Sex offenders have a registry, Stone said, but no other medication is singled out for this potentially dangerous enforcement, as every existing registry has been forcibly breached by the federal government. This was in spite of the state's best intentions and the promises and commitments made to the patients of that state or city. Not only is the registry in violation of HIPAA and other patient rights issues, it subjects some of the sickest members of our state to potential harm, Stone said. In my opinion, what makes a patient registry even more dubious is that with I-502, all residents over 21 can possess 1 ounce of cannabis for recreational use without a registry. Yet this proposed bill would register the neediest and sickest members of our community and subject them to federal criminal exposure. How can that be prudent legislation? The patient community is more organized than in previous sessions and will vigorously fight the proposed legislation, Stone promised. In Tennessee this week, we have a bill filed to legalize marijuana for medical purposes. A Democratic lawmaker there in the volunteer state has filed a bill. It's just simply a matter of being rational and compassionate, said Representative Sherry Jones, a Democrat from Nashville, who sponsored House Bill 1385. It would apply to only the most severely debilitated people, children suffering 100 seizures a day, people on chemotherapy, people with multiple sclerosis, people with a plethora of diseases, Representative Jones said. The Tennessee legislature passed a bill allowing marijuana by prescription, quote unquote, under state law back in the 1980s. But that bill was unworkable as it required federal permission. Attempts since then have died in legislative committees, most recently in 2012. But Representative Jones, along with Toke, the president of Tennessee NORML, say times have changed in the state because of the rapidly developing political situation around cannabis. This really isn't about marijuana at all, according to Patton. It's about freedom and liberty. I think anybody would tell you alcohol is much worse than marijuana, Representative Jones said. If you think alcohol should be legal, then you would think that for sure medical marijuana should be legal. Jones said her bill was drafted by Bernie Ellis, a longtime supporter of medical marijuana, once convicted for providing free cannabis to people with medical problems. It would allow only those with doctors' authorizations for qualified medical conditions to use medical marijuana after paying a $25 registration fee. Medical marijuana patients would get an ID card, which would allow qualifying pharmacies to provide the drug. Tennessee lawmakers really need to talk to legislators in other states, by the way, because if they write this thing to distribute cannabis through pharmacies, it will not work, because pharmacies will want to avoid incurring federal wrath and losing their licenses to dispense pharmaceuticals. The bill has a list of qualifying conditions, including cancer, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, HIV, AIDS, hepatitis C, Lou Gehrig's disease, Crohn's, post-traumatic stress disorder, Alzheimer's, as well as any other medical condition or its treatment as certified or prescribed by practitioners and approved by the state health department. Last time a medical marijuana bill was introduced in Tennessee, it was sponsored by former Representative Gene Richardson and former State Senator Beverly Marrero, both Democrats from Memphis. Both said at the time that Republicans told them privately they were supportive of the concept, but lacked the courage to publicly support it due to possible negative campaigns from primary opponents or negative reactions from the public to any sort of quote-unquote marijuana legalization. Now, that bill died in committee, and both Richardson and Marrero were marked for elimination by Republican-controlled redistricting in Tennessee. It forced them both to run against fellow Democrats for re-election, and both of them lost their seats. That's basically the Republican reaction to marijuana reform in Tennessee. Representative Jones said her brother died of Crohn's disease 2 years ago and would have benefited from medical marijuana in the latter stages of his illness. I don't mind being out there on this, she said. According to Jones, other lawmakers are just scared about bringing up marijuana, especially considering the Republican supermajority in the Tennessee legislature. So far, her bill has no Senate sponsor, which is a prerequisite for passage. Jones said she's still trying to find a senator willing to co-sponsor her bill. In Alaska this week, a big step. Marijuana legalization backers there turned in signatures for the August ballot. And this group, which advocates the legalization of cannabis, said on Wednesday they've turned in more than enough signatures to qualify. The campaign to regulate marijuana in Alaska turned in more than 46,000 signatures. That's about 50% more than the roughly 30,000 they need to qualify for the ballot. And if the Alaska Division of Elections approves those signatures, the ballot language will be prepared. The sponsors of the legalization initiative modeled their work on Colorado's Amendment 64, and they said the next step will be to spread the word and garner support. We'll be taking our message to the voters in lots of different ways, said Tim Hinterberger, one of the measure's three sponsors and a professor at the University of Alaska Anchorage's School of Medical Education. It's clear to everyone that prohibition is a failed policy, Hinterberger said. The proposed initiative will take marijuana sales out of the underground market and put them in legitimate tax-paying businesses. Replacing marijuana prohibition with a system of taxation and sensible regulation will bolster Alaska's economy by creating jobs and generating revenue for the state, Hinterberger said. Alaska's voters approved medical marijuana back in 1998 with a lopsided 59% to 41% vote. Authorized patients there can grow up to 6 plants or possess up to an ounce. An initiative to legalize recreational marijuana failed by the same margin, 41 yes and 59 no in the year 2000. We were waiting to see what would be a good time to revisit it, and the opportunity arose to have some outside support to help move things along, Hinterberger said. The Alaska advocates got help from the Marijuana Policy Project, which played a role in Colorado's successful legalization effort in 2012. It's not that the initiative would bring marijuana to Alaska, said Bill Parker, a former Department of Corrections deputy commissioner and one of the initiative's sponsors. Marijuana is already in Alaska, he said. It would legalize, regulate, and tax it. It would treat it like alcohol. Kevin Sabet, spokesman for a Massachusetts-based anti-cannabis group called Smart Approaches to Marijuana, plans to launch an opposition campaign within the next 2 months. That group will argue that Alaska's marijuana laws are already liberal enough and that a state-regulated cannabis industry would bring onerous government regulations and extra government influence. Alaska could become the third state to legalize recreational marijuana if voters approve. Marijuana sales began in Colorado on New Year's Day and are expected to begin in Washington state this summer. The initiative offers guidelines to the legislature on how to set up regulations governing the production and sale of cannabis, including a $50 per ounce tax. But Hinterberger said the lawmakers will be able to regulate it however they please. High-quality black market marijuana currently averages about $300 an ounce in Alaska. In California, they're doing some crazy things in Fresno County, where the Board of Supervisors this week voted to ban all medical marijuana cultivation. Now, this is a sobering reminder of just how backward county governments can still be, even in California. These guys ignored the objections of patients and banned all medical marijuana cultivation in the county's unincorporated areas with a unanimous 5-0 vote. And that ban takes effect in February. The county is also banning medical marijuana dispensaries and collectives, and that leaves patients with no legal access to medicine, according to California Normal. This Fresno ordinance is in blatant conflict with the intent of the Compassionate Use Act to ensure access to medical marijuana for all patients in medical need, California Normal said. Those who defy this ban will be fined $1,000 a plant. The ordinance adds a fine of $100 per plant per day for each day the plants remain after they are initially discovered. Violations of the public nuisance ordinance would trigger misdemeanor fines. Now, appeals of the ordinance and its citations will be heard by the Board of Supervisors, and this ban takes effect in 30 days. Fresno County is apparently the first in California to completely ban the cultivation of medical marijuana, according to Joe Elford, a lawyer based in San Francisco. In a lawsuit supported by Cal Normal, Elford has filed a motion challenging the right of local governments to ban medical marijuana cultivation. You were speaking about a significant number of people who will be negatively affected, Elford said. It clearly goes against what California voters intended. Elford was referring to Prop 215, the law allowing medicinal use of marijuana, which was approved by state voters back in 1996. Fresno County had initially modeled its cultivation ban after one in Kern County that limits medical marijuana patients to 12 plants. But they took it a big step further after county officials found out that Live Oak, a city near Sacramento, had completely banned cannabis cultivation. The Live Oak ordinance was upheld on appeal. Elford said he petitioned the California Supreme Court to review the recent appellate court decision, which upheld that Sutter County City's ordinance banning all cannabis cultivation. It could be at least 30 days, though, before the California Supreme Court decides to review that challenge. The right to marijuana cultivation is fundamental to Prop 215, according to Dale Geringer, director of California NORML. We must not let this attack go unchallenged, he said. Patients whose rights are violated by local cultivation bans in California are invited to report their complaints to Cal NORML at canormal.org. Fresno County is now inviting a legal case against them, Elford said. It's hasty action that could end up costing taxpayers money. Medical marijuana patients told the board on Tuesday that they shouldn't have to travel long distances for safe access. We need legal dispensaries, and we need to have patients that can grow their own medicine, said Diane Valdovinos of San Francisco. Sheriff Margaret Mims is in favor of the marijuana cultivation ban. She said it couldn't come soon enough. She claimed there were 20 violent incidents involving cannabis cultivation in 2013. Had this not gotten out of control, it may not have resulted in an ordinance like this, Sheriff Mims said, and she claimed that the cost of enforcement is $307,000 annually. In Colorado, we've had a week now of recreational marijuana sales under Amendment 64 legalization there, and sales topped $5 million in the first week. The 37 new recreational cannabis dispensaries around Colorado reported first week retail sales, and when you add up those numbers, it goes over $5 million, according to the Huffington Post. Colorado expects retail cannabis sales to reach $600 million a year, and it expects to collect about $70 million in taxes from them. No official sales figures will be available before February the 20th, when businesses are required to file their January tax reports. New Year's Day sales. On the first day, the shops were allowed to open topped $1 million on that one day. Business slowed slightly on subsequent days, according to the shop owners, but many stores still had long lines of eager customers. Every day that we've been in business since January the 1st has been better than my best day of business ever, said Andy Williams, owner of Denver's Medicine Man Dispensary. The larger shops reported selling 50 to 60 pounds of cannabis in the first week, and smaller shops sold 20 to 30 pounds, according to proprietors. Colorado residents may legally buy up to an ounce of marijuana per transaction, and tourists from out of state can buy 1/4 ounce, about 7 grams. 8 ounces of marijuana, 3.5 grams, were selling for an average of about $65, according to marijuana.com. Prices were raised by the state's 25% tax on retail purchases, including a 15% excise tax and a 10% sales tax. Shop owners said days subsequent to New Year's Day have had about half that first day's sales volume. Fears of shops selling out of weed due to the high demand have so far anyway not panned out. We are not sold out and have tons of inventory, said Ryan Garvey, a bud tender at Denver Kush Club. However, the Huffington Post posted a photo of a sign at the Clinic of Colorado in Denver saying, "We are currently out of recreational cannabis. Please check back tomorrow." Before we go this week, there is a must-read, another from our friend Ron Marsick, the former cop, former health teacher, who now writes the Worth Repeating series for Toke Signals. This one is worth repeating. It's official. Cannabinoids stop brain inflammation. The brain, Ron tells us, is the most sensitive of all the organs, and if the brain ages well, you age well. And phytocannabinoids, that is plant-derived cannabinoids from the cannabis plant, are a potent botanical medicine that can prevent and heal diseases of the brain. To get all the information, check out Worth Repeating. It's official. Cannabinoids stop brain inflammation. on Toke Signals this week. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you come back to be with us again next time on Toke TV. Until then, why not stay lifted?